But welcome to the Latinx Spotlight on Science Fiction Fantasy panel. Welcome to these three panelists. Thank you for joining me. Let me introduce Diego Rodriguez, Arturo Serrano, and Gustavo Vargas. Why don't we go around and have you all introduce yourselves? Arturo, why don't we start with you?
Okay, I currently have my hands on several pies. I am a reviewer for the blog Nerds of a Feather, which last year won a Hugo for Best Fanzine. I also am involved in role-playing. Last year, I published a supplement for Dungeons and Dragons on DM's Guild called Gods and Dissenters, which has subclasses with powers for the Dungeons and Dragons characters who prefer not to inflict violence. And last year, I launched an alternate history novel, To Climate Unknown, which imagines a world where the United States was never founded and tells the history of the world from the 1600s to present time.
Great, thank you. Why don't we go to Gustavo? Why don't you tell us?
Yes, hi. Well, I'm Gustavo Vargas. I'm a Peruvian comic writer and artist based in United Kingdom, basically in Edinburgh right now. I basically create worlds. I've created Peruvian cyberpunk, which deals with pre-Columbian ancestors meeting cyborg and cyberpunk ideas. And I've been producing my work for the last 7 years or so, and I also work as an artist for other products. But basically, that's my trade.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Diego Rodriguez.
Hi everybody. My name is Diego. I'm a Peruvian psychologist, game designer, and game writer. I have around 9 years of experience in the game development industry. And I've made different kinds of games. Every game I've made is very, very different. But the ones I've been working on the past few years are, one of them is a point and click that deals with themes of death and guilt. Another one is about the Peruvian Amazon and the myths and legends of the Amazon. And the third one, which hasn't been announced yet, is a visual novel that also deals with death and guilt and grief.
Great, and I'm sure everyone who's watching noticed that between the three of you, the spectrum of art is extremely well covered. I mean, you guys do all kinds of things, and actually, that's one of the things I want to talk about with you is in not only in the different genres of art that you're working on, or the types of art, sorry, but you're also in different regions. So, what does the science fiction and fantasy community look like where you're sitting right now? Why don't we start with you, Diego, and we'll go the other way around this time.
Sure. About well, the works I'm mostly going to comment about are the video games one, because I mostly know that, and most of them are very, very related to culture and to representation, or cultural diversity in general. And even though there's a lot of people that really like talking about Incan games or games about the Incas, there's so much more out there. For example, one of the games that was launched very recently is Imp of the Sun, which is a game that explores a bit of the Andean cultures, and it has like a lot of Quechua dialogue, a lot of creatures and mythological entities from the Andes. So there's very varied element. And there's also Tunche, which we launched last year, which is about the Amazon. And we don't deal with anything related to the Incas. It's more about the mythology of the Amazon, about the creature Tunche, and many, many others. So yeah, I would say it's pretty much related to that, to mythology, to culture.
Gotcha, thank you. Gustavo?
Yeah, basically, That's actually, I agree with a lot of the ideas that Diego is saying because uh, we have a very big Inca ancestors, but that's like talking. I don't know, for a lot of people, it's like saying Superman, and you have still a lot of superheroes, or if you were saying you have a big character, but there's so much more to explore. In myself, also, I explore a lot of pre-Columbian cultures that have uh, a lot of imagery, a lot of culture, and toward through the years, they have been part of different parts of our country. So I basically explore different cultures and mix them with these cyberpunk uh, themes and other science fiction themes, and I just play with them. And instead of trying to go too big and trying to explore all I can, I usually focus in a certain area. For example, in my stories, I usually name them after a place in particular, and I try to explore all the ancestors that were there and how that influences the work that is happening in that moment. So basically, it's I think there's a lot to explore if you do a bit more of research. The same as Diego has been doing, you can explore and find a lot of more interesting ideas than just to hit the sometimes the basic points that are cool, but if you tweak a bit more, you can find a lot of more interesting answers sometimes and make it a bit more special, and people can understand and learn a lot more about different cultures and how there's different angles to the same science fiction slash fantasy universe.
Arturo?
Please repeat the question.
Sure. So, with the types of work that you're doing, what does the science fiction fantasy community look like to you?
Uh, you mean specifically where I live?
Yes. Yes.
Well, okay. In Colombia, the science fiction community is centered mainly around small independent publishers. It has been very difficult to reach the big publishing houses. And when big publishing houses in Colombia publish science fiction, it is mostly translation from the American production, or because there is a big publishing house in Colombia that is owned by a company from Spain, what we get is translations that come from Spain that either science fiction produced by Spanish writers, writing originally in Spanish, or translations done in Spain, which also makes it difficult to make science fiction in translation available in Colombia, because there has historically been a rivalry in styles of translation between the Spanish that is spoken in Spain and the Spanish spoken here. So the public is not very receptive to translations done by Spanish in the style of Spanish spoken in Spain. However, there are independent publishers working very hard to make Colombian science fiction visible. And the most important one that I can mention is the publishing house Vestigio, which has worked very hard to gain a space of visibility, to make local authors visible, not only in Colombia, in Latin America. There has been an effort to integrate the production of writers from all over Latin America and make them known here through the publishing house Vestigio.
Great. Thank you. And I'm glad you brought up the translation issue, because that's definitely something I've noticed is, I mean, all over Latin America, the translation has always been Castellano. Uh, for example, you did translations for Constelación. When you did those translations, what form did that translation take for you? Did you stick more to the Castellano? Did you do the Colombian, or how did you approach that translation?
Well, in the spirit of transparency, I only translated one story for
Sure.
Constelación.
Mhm.
What was interesting for me is that the author of the story I translated is Mexican, a Mexican writing in English, and I am Colombian. Even though my first impulse when I write in Spanish is to use the Spanish that I know, inevitably there is the gigantic cultural influence that Mexico has had over all of Latin America. And there were instances of very specific Mexican vocabulary, especially indigenous vocabulary in that story, which I had to respect in my translation.
Mm-hmm.
However, I did strive to be as understandable, as widely understandable as possible within the limits of my skill in Spanish. I guess I was a bit fortunate that there wasn't any peculiar slang or any regional idioms that I had to work with, because that made the translation job a lot easier than if I had to translate some regional slang into some regional slang, because then I would have had to choose a specific national form. So what I did with this specific translation may not be a very representative example of the challenges for translating science fiction into Spanish, because this was a story that lent itself to a quote unquote more universal register, which historically has been one of the let's call it propaganda items that Colombia tells about itself. Colombian society likes to sell this idea that Colombian Spanish is the most correct Spanish, if that even exists. But the obsession historically in Colombian society with proper Spanish also influences the way that we make an effort to be precise, to be correct, to be proper. And that may lead to a more conservative form of Spanish, which may lead to other concerns and difficulties, but it also helps our version of Spanish to be more understandable for all Latin people.
Sure. Absolutely. And to continue with the translation, do the three of you write in Spanish first or in English first or both, or how do you approach that? Let's start with you, Gustavo.
Usually, just before I start with this question, I
Sure.
mixed a bit the last part. So basically, where I am regarding your last question about the how the science fiction works in UK, there's a lot of science fiction that gather a lot of different genres, but there's not that many Latin people. So I'm a bit, I stand out a bit more just because I haven't known any other South American there that is making comics. I'm pretty sure there is, but there's not that many. So that only makes a difference. And I'm doing South American themes, so for me it's a bit easier to stand out in a public that does different kind of science fiction, but not related to culture that more in that way. Going back to the language, yeah. Definitely my English is not good enough to start writing in English. So usually I do everything in Spanish. Then I do everything. Then I do the translation in English, because I usually keep two comics, one in Spanish, one in English. And then I ask a fellow writer to help me with the adaptation, because there's a lot of slang, there's a lot of phrasing, there's a lot of terms that you won't be able to just translate, and you have to make an adaptation and use words or different things, or for culture it doesn't work out as it works in Spanish. But in my case, because I use a lot of people from the streets, a lot of gang culture, gang members, I leave a lot of different words that are slangy, that are not really that important for you to understand, but I leave them in Spanish, sometimes in sometimes in just some kind of slang, Quechua. I've used even Aymara there. So because sometimes you don't understand the whole phrase on a context, but by context, you kind of had an idea of what that relates to. Kind of when you travel, you don't know exactly what's happening, but if somebody from a food court is talking to you, you know they're offering you food or something like that. So I played a bit with that. That makes, I don't know, it's a bit of an extra flavor in a way for me to play with.
That's great. And how about you, Diego?
Well, for my personal projects, I do write in Spanish. I prefer writing in Spanish, but for work, it's everything in English. Mainly because our publishers only speak English or communicate better in English. So we have to prepare everything in English for them to approve, to understand, and also for the localization part, where once we have all the text, all of that has to be translated to different languages. So it's much easier for to find English-speaking translators to other different languages. So for me, it has been mainly that experience. In retrospect, I've actually started doing writing in English for my work just because I thought it was better to do it. But later, I noticed that it was actually needed to start with English. And the 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 cool part about that is that you can, I mean, you write it in English, but when we did Tunche, for example, which is a Peruvian game, I could do the translation to Spanish and keep like the main thing um, in the story there, but also use slang or several references in Spanish and change just a little bit of the text for Peruvians to actually enjoy it. So that's like a little fun fact. If you're Peruvian, you're getting a little bit extra.
That's awesome. And how about you, Arturo?
I have written in Spanish for a couple anthologies that were published in Colombia. I have a story in an Argentinian digital magazine, but currently I am writing mostly in English. Some years ago, I self-published a novel in Spanish, which I have since unpublished because I no longer like it. It doesn't, it no longer represents the writer that I am today. And even the first draft of my current novel, To Climates Unknown, was originally in Spanish with the intention to publishing it in the Spanish-speaking market. And it did well in a local contest that I sent it to. But when I expanded it into its complete form, I realized if for this book to say the things that it needs to say and to reach the people that needs these ideas, uh, to be part of of a conversation about the topics that this novel covers, this book needs to exist in English.
I'm glad you brought that up because we've kind of been circling this topic, and hopefully it's getting clear to the people watching this that we all speak Spanish, and obviously a lot of you write in Spanish, but there's this whole publishing industry that's in English, and that's kind of like the big thing. So you had to you felt like you changed the language to English. What have your experiences been with publishing in English-speaking markets? And for example, Gustavo, you're in the UK, so that's a different one than America. But it's America or the UK. It's in English. How does that feel to be writing to that market? Let's start with Arturo.
I spent almost 2 years sending To Climates Unknown to publishing houses and to literary agents. I tried to do it the traditional way. And I keep a small spreadsheet with all the rejections. So far, the count is 90 rejections it has accumulated. Until I said, no, if I want this book to see the light of day, I have to do it myself. I guess 90 rejections is enough. So I self-published it last November. It has done reasonably well. I have not been able to use any budget for marketing, but it has continued very slowly to be sold, like 1 or 2 sales every week, which without any marketing at all, honestly surprises me. But it has gotten a few very favorable reviews, which I guess have given it some visibility. And that is something that has puzzled me a bit because uh, the good reception that this book has had makes me wonder about the selection criteria of all the 90 publishers and literary agents who said they were not the right fit to sell this book or didn't know how to market this book, and or were not sure that they could properly champion this book, which appears to be the word that people use these days, champion the book. I am very curious about what the selection process works, what it looks like inside the publishing houses. But I guess I should not be very overtly critical of the publishing industry because I have seen all the tensions that are happening with them. There are more writers trying to get published than there is space in the publishing market to sell books. So one can understand that publishers have to be very extremely selective and have to have some standards. But still, being on the receiving end of the rejection letters still sucks.
And I think your story is an all too common story when it comes to Latin American, Latina, Latinx writers, or at least that's what I've been hearing. Diego, what about you? How has it been for you?
For us in the video game community, Peru I mean, it's a very small market to, and that's saying a lot. The actual market is out there in Asia and actually in the United States. So we definitely have to market it there. We have to make our games for the international release. So that's what we always have in mind. Always, every single game we make, we try to sell them abroad. We do have a lot of there's a lot of people here in Peru that support us, but to be profitable, we do have to sell in an international market. And yeah, that I mean, the reality of the game development industry is that especially in Peru, it's a very small industry. It's very young as well. There's no real like investment here, so everything has to come from abroad, and contacts are super important. Yeah, for example, for Tunche, we've been very lucky because we had an international publisher, and they helped us with marketing in every single continent, and that actually is a milestone for the industry here in Peru. So we could actually take this story, take this game to every part of the world. So hopefully more publishers can see that there's a lot of talent here in Peru and start investing in other games.
Absolutely. And Gustavo?
How was the question again, please? So I don't get lost.
We've been talking about how you almost have to write to an international market or an English speaking market. How does that affect your work? I mean, you mentioned earlier that you're the only Latin American doing comics in the UK. So what's that experience like for you?
It's been great, actually. The thing is, I started making comics just before leaving Peru. That was around 2014, but just briefly. And I basically all my main career has happened in the UK. And there's a big community there of making comics. It's a lot of self-publishing and publishing. Publishing is not as big as it is in USA, but still there's a market there, and there's a big circuit of festivals and conventions monthly, to each month and something like that. And UK is not that big, so many people cross each other paths, and you might see the same people in this other convention and this other convention. So that creates a whole pillow that kind of holds the whole community. In the beginning, I just felt I wanted to do the story to touch these Peruvian themes without thinking I had no idea if people were going to be interested or not. And to my surprise, in general, people are very, very interested, even though they know a lot about Peru or South America, or if they know, they want to know more. And if they don't know, they want to know what's that about. So in general, it's very positive. I think in the last, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years, there's a lot of more independent themes and original publications that are appearing more and more. And I think there's a bigger market for people getting interested in things that are a bit different and not just touching the same themes over and over again. So I think in that case, I, again, I feel very lucky, but I think people are very interested in seeing something different than seeing just the same. And the thing is, I'm in UK, and little by little, especially running self-publishing campaigns, crowdfunding via Kickstarter. I'm also entering to small groups in United States, which again, the language really opens barriers because even in Peru, sometimes, for example, now that I came, I also brought some comics and I don't have them in Spanish because I live there. So I just print them in English, and they've been buying the comics in English because they know at the moment there's no choice in Spanish. So it's funny, but it goes to many other places. That it's definitely a tool that is way more interesting because a lot of people can read it in English, and there's a bigger market in that way. Yeah.
That kind of leads into the next thing I want to talk about. Both you and Arturo talked about, or your works deal with you had mentioned pre-Columbia, and Arturo, you had talked about a world if the United States hadn't been or colonized or invented. Are those the kinds of stories you're telling, or is that woven into the kinds of stories you're telling? And why are you choosing that? Let's start with Diego. What kind of stories are you telling with your medium?
Well, we're actually trying to like tell as many different kind of stories as we can. We usually don't like look for one in particular, even though some of the themes in several are like very similar. For Tunche, it was mainly we saw that there wasn't any other game that actually used the Amazon as a main setting. So we started with that, and then we thought, let's use all these myths, all these cultures, all these legends that many people don't know. So we could actually tell it to the world, share it with the world, and basically start from there. So uh, for that game in particular, it was very interesting because we actually we did some research, but we also noticed that we knew a lot of that culture and mythology already. So we put a lot of our own anecdotes and stories in there. Basically, it was like a very, very personal project, both from our own uh, from our own nationality, but also from our own personal experiences. And the other two games, which are one is a point and click and the other is a visual novel, they both explore death and grief from very, very different angles. And the first one is also very like it's not like death from a negative space, but rather death as a celebration, actually, or death as something freeing. And there's other interpretations in there. It's just a very metaphorical game that pushes players to get their own meaning out of it. And the other one is much more straightforward, and it's about well, death, but also about trauma and about trying to grow uh, through all those things. So I would say we don't really choose the stories. They just like come to us and we try to work something out of them.
Mhm.
How about you, Arturo?
I'm not sure that I could say that I have a type of topic.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in the specific case of this novel, what drew me toward this topic was the climate in general, the conversation surrounding the Bush Junior administration. I was paying attention to the way that the United States idea of itself had shifted during the Bush administration, and this narrative began to emerge about the indispensable nation, the idea of a country that has a mission in the world. And what first shocked me about that narrative was the sheer hubris that any country could think that about itself. And when I started trying to turn that idea around in my head, trying to explore what that idea entailed, where it came from, what possible support it could have in the history of the country, it coincided with the time that I read The Years of Rice and Salt, by Stanley Robinson, which explores a world where the European civilization disappears. And that has been a gigantic influence on my novel. I wanted to completely refute the narrative of American exceptionalism, of the idea of a country that needs to exist, of a country that is a historical necessity, of a country that has a specially, even divinely mandated mission for the world. Because especially from politicians from the Republican Party who were part of the Mormon Church, one could begin to discern this idea of America as a country that has power by divine rule, and that is a very dangerous idea. And the most practical idea, the most practical way to confront that idea, to refute that idea in fiction, was to completely remove the United States from the panorama, to show that it is possible to imagine this country not even existing, not even being conceived, not even being planned, and to show that the world would have been worse in some ways and better in some ways, and maybe some of the beautiful ideas about America, like representative government and the rejection of monarchy and all those lofty ideals, could very well have emerged elsewhere in different circumstances, in different contexts, and America does not own those concepts. So that was mainly the motivation of this novel, to confront the hubris of American exceptionalism and to confront the narrative that history needed to have America in it.
That's great. Gustavo?
Well, basically, the main comics I'm producing myself, it's like a visit. It's more like a geographical visit to Peru. So each one usually happens in parts of the coast, or in the Andes, or in the jungle of Peru. That's one of the first things that most people notice sometimes, that don't know that much about Peru, that people think that it's more like an Andean country, and there's also a lot of coast and even more jungle than there's Andes. So it's basically like visiting the Peru that lies in my head, and I create all these characters, all this universe, and kind of went ahead of what I was thinking of Peru, how would it develop, and it made sense to mix it with cyberpunk ideas, that is more like anarchical things, and there's big brother things, and governments trying to control them, and there's a lot of gangster, there's a lot of people basically making the day and trying to survive what's happening on their surroundings, while showing you a lot of cybers and things that are mixing with our pre-Columbian culture, although it's religion, beliefs, or anything that has to do with technology. So basically, I've created all this world, and it's like if I could go to visit one part of a city or an area, and I choose to follow one character, and in some moment I decide, okay, I think I like this character, and I create that story regarding that character, and tell what's happening surrounding there that has to relate to the area they're exploring and then create an adventure. So basically, it's like, for me, it's exploring different parts of Peru and developing exploring these characters, and the story comes after that little by little. I'd like to explore a bit more. Actually, I definitely want to do a lot more Peruvian cyberpunk stories. I also want to visit myths in some moment, but as I am the writer artist, there's a limit of speed that I can go with my work. So I have a lot of plans to keep on exploring Peru, but basically it's that it's visiting the Peru that lies in my head and touching all these bases and show the world a bit what's interesting and what can be told about the Peru that I know.
And once again, you're leading me into the next topic. During all of your time creating art as Latin Americans, how has the landscape evolved, or have you seen anything change? Have you seen anything that's excited you about the future possibilities? And what do you think could be in the future for Latin American art? Let's just continue with you, Gustavo.
I don't like I said, I don't have that much contact with Latin America in that way. I know some creators in Peru, but I don't know that much. But that said, especially in COVID times, we saw a lot of increase. Graphic novels were actually selling more than before, especially graphic novels, not so much the floppies, but the big books. There's a lot of very interesting markets appearing. The little I know about Peruvian authors, there's a lot of more young talent that it's entering different markets, especially I think USA. So I think there's still I think it's starting to get bigger and bigger, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot more of new talent that will appear little by little. I also I see these new generations. There's a lot of independent things that are getting very steady, producing comics and stories. But I also see a lot of new people that are more used to this globalized world, and that connects a lot of options. So myself, even though I don't know that much, I see it growing exponentially, little by little, for sure.
That's great. How about you, Diego?
Well, for the gaming industry, well, game development industry in Peru, the same thing. It's right now it's very small. There's like maybe 30 game studios here in Peru, and most of them have like maybe 5 people or less, with 2 of them with 30 or a little more. So there's a lot of talent that's actually um, entering the industry and trying to make games, and that I mean games in general, not like narrative focused games, but in general. And I see that part grow definitely. But what I don't see growing that much is those specifically narrative driven games. There's a lot of narrative in games in general, but I think we are lacking a lot of like big stories or games that like have a lot of story in. It's hard for me to explain it, but um, there's some visual novels, yes, but there's not like big visual novels or big action games. And it's not like the industry needs it, but um, and also we don't have like enough investment to do it. But what I'm trying to do for my part is start like creating different stories and uniting different creatives to make more narrative driven stories, and eventually like have a collective or something like that, and try to grow that side of the game development industry.
That's great. And you, Arturo?
The funny thing about having a role as a reviewer is that it forces me to stay informed of what is happening in publishing trends. So since last year, when I began writing reviews, I have had to do a lot of catching up with what is happening, what is being published, and I see progress happening. Just last year, I had the opportunity to read a very exciting anthology of short fiction written by Latin writers. It's called Speculative Fiction for Dreamers. And this year, I saw another anthology, Reclaim the Stars. And what I noticed in both those anthologies is that they make space both for established writers and newcomers. And that is a great opportunity to gain more visibility. And more publications like that I see happening, especially in literature for children. There is this whole movement of visibility of Latin children in the diaspora getting the opportunity to see themselves represented, and that is a very positive development of all these wave of diversity. I no longer remember which was the writer who called this the rainbow age of science fiction. And in this rainbow age, I see space being created for all varieties of writers from all identities. So progress is happening very slowly, but it is happening.
That's great. Thank you. We have time for a few audience questions. We've got 3 of them. I don't think we'll be able to get to all 3. But this first one's short. Are any of you writing science fiction fantasy in South American indigenous languages? I think at least one of you touched on the possibility of like some slang and all that. Let's start with you, Arturo.
No, I don't know any indigenous languages, sorry.
Okay, short and sweet. Diego?
Yeah, me neither. We, for Tunche, we have some Quechuan words and some Aymara words. But me personally, no. But I know of some projects here in Peru that are using those languages, and probably others as well.
Gotcha. And Gustavo?
No, I haven't. I don't know any native language, but usually I try to in one of my comics, in a couple actually, when I portrayed a community that speak that language. For example, there's one area that happens in Puno that is in the highlands of Peru, and this community speaks Aymara language. So I wrote the whole dialogue, and it's a bit like when you see a film that is in a foreign language. It's not the same when you see it dubbed that when you see it with subtitles. It sounds completely. You have to make an extra effort, but you really feel the language informs in a different way, even if you don't understand it. So I have all the text written in. I made it the translation with a translator from Aymara, and I put the Aymara and I just put the captions in English. So you can read it. If you know Aymara, you can read it, but at least you have the dialogue there, because in that way I feel I can represent and show how something sounds and how something looks, even though I don't understand it. It's really nice, but in that way I'm trying to be more honest about telling a story of a particular community, a particular area. And definitely I'm planning on doing a bit more, especially for future stories, Quechua, Aymara, or any language from the jungle, for example.
That's great. We've got another question here. In your experience, how do markets respond to bilingual works, as in stories that include both Spanish and English to some degree? Let's go to the opposite order. Gustavo, I'll start with you.
I was actually very happily surprised that many of my comics have slang that come from different places and in different Aboriginal languages. Sometimes I put localist slang, and I remember on Twitter I found two readers of my work that I know them from the conventions. They were discussing a word that is called guarique, that is very slangy word for a very particular place where you go to eat, that is only like a family place where you go to eat something that is very niche and special for some kind of dish. And they were discussing that, and I was like, okay, yes. So yeah, I think once if you have readers enough curious enough to go a bit further, actually they can enjoy that. It's like the same, like traveling a lot, like getting a bit more curious instead of like, oh, come on, say that to me in my language. No, I think if we make the effort, people, and we made it very honest and try to say it in the best way we can and portray it in the best way we can, people are also going to get more, make a bit more of effort and get more curious about that.
That's great. Diego?
Yeah, for me as well. I was also happily surprised to see that in Tunche. We actually were very, very conservative and tried to put most of it in English. Well, for the English translation. But for those words in Spanish or Quechua that we did leave there, people were actually like trying to pronounce them at first, then like trying to understand them. It was at first it was a little funny, but then like they actually tried to understand it, so it was very nice to see that interest. This, for example, is it can't be shown for, I don't know, for Japan, China, and Korea that use a different what do you call it? A different I mean, well, different characters. So you even though we put like Quechua words, Spanish words, for them it's still it's only the pronunciation, not the real word.
Mhm.
But for everyone else, yeah, it's very surprising to see they enjoy it.
And Arturo?
I see this happening with all diasporas, not only the Latin diaspora. I remember seeing a discussion either this year or last year about a Vietnamese American author who had included Vietnamese words in their books. And the response to immigrant communities in the States, drawing from their cultures and showing in the way they write, the blended nature of their identities in a blended language, has had likewise a blended response. There is hostility from some sectors, there is enthusiastic reception from other sectors, and however, I see this as a positive, that this is even happening, that this is being allowed to happen, that this is a discussion that has been open, because Anglo culture has expanded all over the world so aggressively that it should not be seen as a disruption or corruption of English to open the space of English for all the people who now call English home. English has this ability to expand and encompass all cultures. And as long as English remains as dominant as it is, at least people who from all sorts of life circumstances ended up living in English from other cultures should have the space and should have the implicit permission to make English their own and to create a space for themselves in Anglo culture.
That's extremely well said. I agree completely. So we're out of time, so I'd want to take the opportunity to go around and have you all tell people where they can find you, tell people where they can get, for example, your book, Arturo, or Diego, your games, or your comic books, Gustavo. So let's start with Arturo.
My novel, The Climates Unknown, is available on Amazon Kindle and Kobo. I write reviews on the blog Nerds of a Feather. I am on Twitter, Arturo222. And on DM's Guild, I have this Dungeons and Dragons supplement called Gods and Descenders.
Awesome. Diego?
You can find Tunche in every platform, in PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, and PC. And you can find me at Twitter, and you can see my handle here in my name. Otherwise, it's Dirole2099. Yeah, that's it.
Great. Gustavo?
You can find my books at gustavovargas.bigcartel.com. If that's too hard, you just type Gustavo Vargas. That's why I use the two Fs. Nobody else, I think, has
That's
that
smart.
name.
That's smart.
Yeah, and if yeah, because if you look Gustavo Vargas, you find a lot of people. And if not, just search for Peruvian Cyberpunk and you will find my books.
Great. Thank you so much, you three. It's been a pleasure getting to know you a little bit better and hearing you speak on this. There's the chat is going to be open for another hour, I believe, before the next panel. If you guys want to drop in there, I encourage you. I know you guys have deadlines and stuff you have to get back to, but especially if you want to drop links to your stuff, definitely do that before you get out of here. And maybe there's some questions you can answer in there. But thank you to the three of you so much. It's been a pleasure for me to hear from you all. Thank you to everyone who attended and listened, and thank you to Flights of Foundry. Everyone,
Thank you.
have a good day and or night. Bye.
Bye.